So yeah, just a wee agenda for today. We'll go through the background, what investment priorities are, so a bit about our funding allocation, how the fund's been managed, and then Q&A and some next steps as well. So the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is replacing the current EU funding, and it will provide 2.6 billion of new funding for local investment by March 2025 across the UK. And that's part of a suite of complementary levelling up funding that includes the UK Community Renewal Fund, which you'll be aware of from last year, the UK Levelling Up Fund that is currently in its second round, and the UK Community Ownership, which is recently opened as well. So the Shared Prosperity Fund will provide all areas of the UK with an allocation of revenue and capital funding. So this is an allocation and not a competition for the Shared Prosperity Fund, and the amount of funding available will taper in from this financial year, reaching 1.5 billion a year by 2025 across the UK. So the purpose of it is to empower each place to identify and build on their own strengths and needs at a local level, and it's focused on pride in place and increasing life chances. The delivery of the fund's been delegated to local authorities who are going to be supported by local partners, and the fund will enable local places to build up a package of funding drawn on other programmes such as Levelling Up Fund and employability and skills support to maximise impact and simplify delivery. And there's two key components to the Shared Prosperity Fund, which are the core UK Shared Prosperity Fund and Multiply. Multiply is specifically around numeracy and that sort of thing, and we'll go into a wee bit more detail about that later. It's kind of within but slightly separate to the corporate shared prosperity stuff. So the aims of the fund, like I said, is to build pride in place and increase life chances across the UK, and it wants to deliver on each of the following levelling up objectives: to boost productivity, pay, jobs and living standards by growing the private sector, especially those in places where they are lagging, spread opportunities and improve public services, especially those in places where they are the weakest, restore a sense of community, local pride and belonging, especially in those places where they've been lost, and to empower local leaders and communities, especially in those places lacking local agency. So across the Shared Prosperity Fund, there are three investment priorities, which are community in place, supporting local business and people and skills. And for each of those three priorities, there's a number of objectives, which you can see there. I won't read through them all, but I'll leave it there for a couple of seconds just so you can scan your eyes over. We'll go into them in a wee bit more detail in a second. But it gives you a sense of the kind of work that the UK government are expecting to happen under each of the three priorities that they've outlined. Let's have a look at that. So in terms of the context at a national level for the Shared Prosperity Fund, the fund fits within the UK government's levelling up agenda, and the fund contributes to 7 of the 12 levelling up missions that the UK government have identified. You can see them in this slide as well. So all 3 of the objectives that they've outlined will contribute to mission 9, which is the one around building pride in place. And then you'll be able to see here that each of the 3 objectives have some unique levelling up missions that they contribute to as well. Some of them you'll notice are across multiple objectives, like mission 7 and mission 8, and then some of them are quite unique, and like mission 2 is only for supporting local businesses. I'll provide these slides afterwards. You can go through these at your leisure and have a good look at them. Yeah, there's quite a lot of text here, but it just gives you a sense of how the Shared Prosperity Fund fits into the wider levelling up agenda that the UK government is pushing just now. So under each of the 3 objectives, there's a number of interventions that they list, and there's 51 in total across the 3 objectives and Multiply, and across just the 3 objectives, I think it's 41 interventions. Here's a selection of them under each objective to kind of give you a sense of the work that they are anticipating local authorities and their partners will be delivering. So under communities in place, it's things around place-based investment for regeneration and town centre improvements, support for sports, arts, cultural heritage and creative activities, active travel, volunteering, community measures to reduce cost of living, Local business support is around promotion of visitor economy, research and development grants, business support, COVID resilience and recovery, and people and skills, things like support for economically inactive people, digital inclusion, support for local skills need, green skills courses, and support for vulnerable young people who are leaving school. So like I said, that's just a flavour of some of them. There's around sort of 10 to 15 of these interventions under each objective, and I'll provide that information separately so you can go through them and have a good look at each of the interventions under each objective. So like I mentioned earlier, Multiply is kind of separate to the main Shared Prosperity Fund, but does still fall within the Shared Prosperity Fund umbrella. So this is a specific programme that is around transforming the lives of adults across the UK by improving their functional numeracy skills. It aims to increase adult numeracy across the population, leading to better labour market outcomes. It is for all adults without a level 5 or equivalent in maths. And the UK government is allocating up to 559 million through the Shared Prosperity Fund, and that's over the 3 years. In Scotland, Multiply is going to be delivered as part of the single UK Shared Prosperity Investment Plan developed by local areas. So South Lanarkshire will have responsibility for delivering the Multiply objectives locally as well. Like I said, they have their own menu of interventions for this. I won't go through this again. I'll leave it there for a couple of seconds so you can scan over it and get a sense of what Multiply is all about. But it's certainly something that we may be getting involved in as well, although it will most likely fall to education services and their partners to deliver on Multiply outcomes, but it's still useful to kind of understand the kind of work that will be going on around that. So the funding that's available, so this is the juicy bit, how much money is there actually going to be? So in South Lanarkshire, we have a conditional allocation of £12,221,811 over the 3 year period. And that's split, as you can see, just over 10 million for the core 3 shared prosperity objectives and just over 2 million for Multiply. So for each year, there's a minimum amount of capital spend that we must have, and that changes over each of the 3 years, reaching up to around 20% of the total allocation by the 3rd year. So that's just the minimum. So we can spend more than that should we choose to. It just depends what we decide are our priorities for South Lanarkshire. There are match funding requirements for it. There aren't match funding requirements for it, but it is encouraged that we do look at opportunities for leveraging in match funding to complement the UK Shared Prosperity Fund investment. In 2023, the allocation will be paid once for the investment plan, once it's signed off by the UK government. So we'll develop the investment plan, they'll approve it, sign it off, and then we'll get the money. And then in 23-24 and 24-25, we will receive the allocation for that year at the start of the year. This is, and just a wee note is that we can spend can be backdated to the 1st of April of this year, but that would be at risk. So anything that we'd committed prior to having our investment plan approved would be at risk. There's no guarantee that anything that we'd spent prior to getting it approved would be approved. So yeah, lead local authorities would receive a grant determination letter and a memorandum of understanding setting out fund requirements and obligations, and we as a local authority would be required to return any underspend at the end of each financial year. Having heard from the UK government, they seem at this stage fairly flexible around that, around moving stuff around. But like I said, the picture's kind of changing every day, so we would hope to get some more clarification on that from them by the time the fund, particularly by the end of the financial year, about what would happen with that. But it does seem that they are acknowledging that it's brand new. We're all still learning, and there would be some opportunity for moving that around. The expectation for fund investment and outputs to be achieved in line with each place's investment plan are need to be on time and in year. But again, like I said, they said that there might be some scope for moving that around. A bit more of a detailed breakdown of the funding allocation across each year. You can see for 22-23, our allocation is relatively small, but by the time we get to 24-25, it's nearly 6.5 million for the core UK Shared Prosperity Fund objectives. Of that, the split is just below, about just over 1 million for capital at least, and over 5 million for revenue. And then the multiply figures at the side as well. So obviously everything in multiply is revenue, and that remains fairly static over the 3 years, between just over 6 and just over 700,000 each year. So how is the funding being delivered? So the UK government have encouraged all areas to look at partnership approaches to delivering the Shared Prosperity Fund. So the decision has been made that we will be submitting an investment plan as part of Glasgow City Region. So that would be with the other 7 member authorities of Glasgow City Region. For that, the head of Glasgow City Region's UK Shared Prosperity Fund investment plan is Mike McNally, and the Shared Prosperity Fund project group is currently being established, excuse me, with representation from each of the 8 local authorities, and the intent is to have weekly meetings to keep everybody updated on that. There was a workshop session on the 10th of May with the UK government and the Glasgow City Region just to work out our approach to delivering the fund, and kind of excuse me, the approach that we've gone for in terms of how we will develop Glasgow City Region wide investment plan is that each of the 8 local authorities will be asked to produce a kind of mini investment plan unique to our local authority, which will be submitted to Glasgow City Region, and from that they will compile a Glasgow City Region wide investment plan taking consideration of the priorities that each of the local authorities have indicated. So in terms of what an investment plan actually is, so in them, places must set out the challenges that they face under each of the investment priorities and the local opportunities that we intend to support. There's flexibility to invest across the investment priorities to meet local needs and opportunities. So while there's 3 investment priorities, there's no stipulation that we must invest equally across them. Our kind of starting point was to think that we would split the investment equally across each of the 3 priorities, but after consultation with yourselves and other partners, it becomes clear that there's perhaps one of the 3 objectives that is more important or more of a priority for South Lanarkshire, then there's absolutely scope to invest more than 1/3 of our investment towards that one. So under each objective, we will be asked to set out measurable outcomes that we're looking to deliver to help achieve what the UK government is looking for, and we will be asked to pick from the long list of 51 interventions. Of there's 10 of those are multiply, so it's really 41 interventions for the 3 core shared prosperity objectives. We'll be asked to pick what our priorities are. That will be included in the investment plan that goes to Glasgow City Region. And the plans also need to take account of the wider funding landscape, existing programmes, other new funding opportunities, and in particular complementary interventions from other national or local schemes and strategies. And plans must describe the stakeholder engagement and MP engagement and support. So things like this that we're doing, we need to evidence that we have sought and listened to and implemented the feedback that we've got from various partners. So of the delivery options for funding, we have flexibility in how we do that. The UK government has indicated a preference for competitions for grant funding within the Shared Prosperity Fund allocation, but that's not set in stone. We can absolutely go down the procurement or commissioning routes if we thought that that was more suitable for South Lanarkshire, and in all, it's likely that there'll be a combination of different delivery options within our investment plan, depending on what we feel is the most appropriate option, and also our partners feel the most appropriate option. So in terms of consultation engagement, We recognise that local insight and expertise is essential to identify and address need and opportunity and to enable the delivery of the right solutions for each place. We need to look at how we can achieve the biggest impact on our selected outcomes for each place, and our need to engage and work with a diverse range of local partners and stakeholders and partnerships to achieve the fund objectives and outcomes and local objectives. So yeah, basically this kind of work, speaking to as many people as we can and gaining as broad an input as possible to make sure that what we are proposing to Glasgow City Region and to the UK government does actually reflect the needs of South Lanarkshire. So in terms of the timeline, this has changed a little bit, or will change a little bit. So the UK government have recognised that with the council elections that recently happened, we actually won't be able to have a full sit-down council meeting to approve whatever investment plan we put forward until August. So they have invited all local authorities who need it, which will basically be everyone in Scotland, to apply for an extension for their investment plan. So it looks like our proposal will go to South Lanarkshire committee at the start of August. So we have, quite a long time left to get this investment plan prepared. And then that'll go to the UK government, who are looking to have them approved. I think the indicative timescale was October, to have them approved by then, and then we'll be able to start spending from October as well. This is just some links. Like I said, I'll send out these slides so that you all can have a look at all of the information that's available on the Shared Prosperity Fund so far, and yeah, just familiarise yourself with it and what the whole thing's about. There's a lot of information there, so it's no small task trying to get a grip of all of it, but you're more than welcome to have a look at anything while you're kind of looking at what your priorities are going to be. And I think that's us. If we want to sort of open the floor to questions, I'm sure there's a lot, and like I said, I'll try my best between myself and Pamela to answer any questions that you've got, but it may be that we have to come back to you on it, but we'll do our best today. I don't know if you want to maybe, Nancy,
Nancy.
on you go.
Microphone. I just wondered what input the rest of us would actually have into the investment plan that South Lanarkshire have got to produce. There's not an awful lot of time to have a consultation, so is there any plan to include the rest of us in what actually goes forward? Yeah,
so this is our first step towards doing that today. So what we're hoping to get from yourselves is a kind of indicative indication as to what you feel the priorities might be at this stage, but also sort of if you were able to go away, perhaps take a couple of weeks to think as a sector what your priorities are, and you come back to us with what you think we need to be included in the investment plan. I know it's a lot of information to take in today, and I wouldn't ask you to, and within an hour or within half an hour to tell us exactly what the third sector's priorities are for South Lanarkshire, but we are hopeful that you'll be able to perhaps come together as a third sector, identify what you would like to see in the investment plan and put that to us, and have us include it in the plan that's going to Glasgow City Region.
Thank you.
So it's maybe a question that goes back to yourselves, and that was maybe what I was going to wait till the end, was kind of how would you feel would be the most helpful way for you to kind of collate that information and feed it back to us?
I would think it would probably have to be through VASLAN, because that's the conduit for these things. So, but then that would have to be decided if that can be fitted in with the VASLAN work plan. Mm-hmm. This is a big ask, Adam.
No, absolutely. It is a big ask, and we have been asked to do it by the UK government, and we're also desperately trying to find capacity to deliver this along with everything else that we're doing. So I completely appreciate that it is a huge ask, and it'll be a big undertaking. but it's what we've been asked to do, and I can only put that to you as well. So sorry for that.
Yeah, just to go on from that, we are happy to facilitate anything if it can work in, just as Nancy said, if it can work in with sort of work plan and the stuff that we have at the moment. But obviously it's a good opportunity, and rather than keep the third sector out, we would rather get our voices heard, make sure that we have an input into this. I think, Leslie, you've got your hand up.
Yes, Adam, I'm just noticing the approval for year one's not until October, which is late on in the financial year. So do we know yet whether it's funds have got to be committed by the end of the financial year or actually spent, or if there's an opportunity to take it into year two?
So that is one of the things that we've put to the UK government to get some clarification on. We initially thought that it would have had to have been spent by the end of the financial year, but like I said, they are open to a bit of movement in that. So I think if the money was committed by the end of the financial year, it might be okay, but it's certainly something that we've put to the UK government to get clarification on. And so I wouldn't be able to give a definite answer either way, but I'll certainly take a note of it and make sure that as soon as we get an answer, we feed it back to yourselves.
Thanks, Adam.
Hi there, Adam. Tony Scott, sorry, I'm looking for the hand up button here. I can't find any actions. I'm usually using Teams, so it's quite strange to me. Anyway, just a couple of things. You mentioned the City Regional deal. Does that mean that you'll joint commission with them through things like the Excel framework that they're trying to establish at the moment? Or you mentioned that you've got your own small grants. So would be elements of this, for example, that you would commission yourself, and elements you go through the City Regional deal if you decide, because Glasgow's saying they're going through the Excel framework, just to get an understanding of that, because obviously, again, it's back to some of the point, Nancy, it's about resourcing all of this. We work in 26 local authorities and try to work your way through all of these different plans, different procurement cycles, different ways of procuring our commissioning services is becoming quite a jigsaw puzzle, to be honest with you. So just, do you know what your intent is yet in terms of commissioning?
So that is another thing that we've not yet decided on. So South Lanarkshire are keen to retain as much of the money and as much of the kind of lead over that as we can within South Lanarkshire. We are hoping that each of the 8 local authorities will basically be able to run their own Shared Prosperity Fund programme under the kind of banner Glasgow City Region. And one, Glasgow City Region are pushing us to look at options, not necessarily in year one because it might be too soon, but certainly for year 2 and 3 to look at options for some of that kind of wider strategic commissioning across the city region. However, there's not been any agreement on that so far. There's actually a meeting happening right now in Glasgow with that. That's why my colleague Kenny isn't here. He's at that meeting kind of negotiating how those kind of questions are going to be answered. So it is a very, very moving picture just now, and we're kind of throwing everything that we have at it to kind of get our heads around it and figure out what we need to be doing as a local authority independently and what we need to be doing as part of Glasgow City Region. It was the UK government that told everybody they would prefer things to be delivered at a city region level, but it hasn't been made clear as to whether or not that means that each of the 8 local authorities in Glasgow City Region would need to have the same investment priorities, or if there would be scope for us to be kind of independent within Glasgow City Region. So those things are still kind of being hashed out. On our end, we are pushing to retain as much kind of authority over our allocation as possible. Glasgow City Region, I understand, are pushing all 8 to look at ways that we could perhaps undertake some of that strategic commissioning across the local authority, but across the city region, but there's not been any agreement on that so far. That's, you know, what this kind of consultation that we're doing as well could help to inform as to what you think would be the most useful way of doing that. If you're a local authority, if you're a organisation that only works across South Lanarkshire, I imagine that you'd have different input than an organisation that did have a presence in multiple local authorities and perhaps would prefer kind of a city region wide approach. So that would perhaps be the kind of information that we think would be important to come back from yourselves, so that kind of we have as full a picture as possible as to our local landscape and what you think works for you.
Just, if I don't mind, another question, Adam. I mentioned the UK government and other local authorities where I've had the same similar presentations. We all know how bureaucratic the previous European programme as well was. People really struggled to spend some of the money. We also had an experience with the CRF that you mentioned there about, you know, when it was meant to come out, and that's actually about 8 months it took to actually get from Leslie's point, from when we put in those plans to releasing some of the funds. And I think the timescale that UK government set is pretty ambitious as well for yourself, by end of August and get a result by September, October. And then behind that, you've got all of this commissioning, drawn up with contracts. And lastly, nobody can give me any information on the management information systems they're going to be using across the UK Shared Prosperity Fund for local authorities, whether you do it regionally or locally, and what details required, because the devil's in the detail in terms of that. Now, everybody talks about, and you mentioned as well, Adam, the moment about light touch, and I'd be absolutely delighted if it was light touch and we got more money to the front services. But you know, and I know about the bureaucrats, when they get a hold of something, you know, Kickstart or CRF, it all comes in later. And if you don't build those costs, it makes it very difficult to deliver. And if we're doing this kind of blind here in terms of we don't really know what management information systems required, how that will be inputted, how you collaborate that with others, what kind of level of detail and evidence is required for your outcomes in terms of that. So it really is in the dark a little bit. And lastly, my understanding is there'll be no veerment if you don't spend your cash in year one. It'll just be taken off your allocation. My understanding is there's no veerment in that in terms of that. If that's changed, that's great, but that's my understanding, which makes, I think, year one quite, even though it's a small amount or a smaller, it still makes it quite challenging. And lastly, just on that, I'm happy to collaborate with everybody around here, around the table, around joining up the voluntary sector. But what happens all the time is we collaborate to give advice, USPs and everything else, and then we're set against each other in a competitive process in terms of that. So it makes it very, very difficult, Adam, across the board, not just in your local authority, but across the board. We're asked for partnership and collaboration, and we're set against each other in a competitive process.
Yeah, so that was, I'll try and remember each of the points. So yeah, we absolutely are kind of operating in the dark now, and the information is still coming from the UK government, and we're responding as quickly as we can to that. In terms of the spend, so the meeting that or the webinar information session that the UK government held last Friday, they certainly suggested that there was going to be more flexibility than perhaps initially, there may be initially hinted that there would be earlier on. I think that they recognise, the CRF last year is a perfect example of how much longer things took than they initially said they would, and I think they are understanding that everybody, all local authorities, council areas across the UK are stretched to deliver this, and they're going to have to assessing a lot of information that's coming into them whenever everybody submits these investment plans. So I think they are open to looking at ways that we can be flexible as possible within our spend to make sure that nobody does lose anything. That was part of Glasgow City Region's kind of, that's why they'd suggested that they should be the lead authority for this, is because if there was any risk of underspend, they would be able to internally within the 8 local authorities look at ways of moving money around so that nobody lost anything. But I get those discussions are still happening. There's nothing set in stone. The picture is moving, and we are just trying to generate as much information and feedback from yourselves so that we can inform that process as best we can and make sure that whatever is put forward works as best it can for everybody. With regards to your point about competition, I completely agree, and that was actually a question that I asked yesterday, because just from previously working in the third sector, I know that is something that you're all concerned about, is the kind of, being asked to work together to develop, your input, and then potentially being pit against each other in a competitive process for that money. So I would ask, as part of the discussion that you're going to be having and the feedback that you're going to be providing, is perhaps to present what you feel would be the best way of doing that, then, so that we aren't top down telling you what we think works, but you telling us as the providers what you think would be the best way, obviously bearing in mind that there's not enough money for everybody to go around, and we would like to avoid a competitive process that pits you all against each other, because I know the resource that goes into developing competitive bids, but I don't know if we have the information at our hands to be able to dictate that process without competitive element to it. So I would invite you all to tell us what you think would be the best way, if there's an activity that you could perhaps deliver in partnership, or if there's a way that a couple of organisations take the lead in delivering certain interventions. Whatever you think would be the best way to avoid the competitive process, we would love to hear it, and look at ways of delivering that, because I totally understand it's certainly something that's been fed back to us before, and I think avoiding that competitive element is in your best interest, and we would like to support that if possible.
Yeah, I think that answers the question that's just came in on chat from Ashley, in terms of looking at the sector coming together as a whole rather than individual applications. But Nancy, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I think just to sort of expand that point, I think the Community Renewal Fund of last year, I think what happened across South Lanarkshire was that those people who were interested in a collaborative effort really got together, and the actual application that was put in was in fact that it was a partnership approach. Mm-hmm. So I think we have shown that that's possible. We've set a precedent on that, and I would expect that this time would be the same, so that anyone who's interested gets around the table, and what's put forward is actually a joint approach to what's needed across South Lanarkshire.
Yeah, and just to touch on the CRF that was submitted last year, I know I maybe met some of you last year in that process, but the difference between the CRF and this year's Shared Prosperity Fund isn't huge. So if you perhaps looked at what was put forward in the CRF and thought, yeah, that is still what we think as a sector is important to us, then you can certainly put a version of that back in, or if your priorities have changed, certainly. But I thought that process worked really, really well. And like you said, it sort of presented a really unified approach from the third sector as to what you felt was important. So if that was the route that you wanted to go down, that would be really interesting to hear, if it was the same or any changes that had been made.
Graham, sorry, I've bypassed you for Nancy. No, that's because she's my chair. I've got about it.
That's all right. I may as well just take the opportunity of saying hello to Nancy after 25 years. The reference to CRF, I think, typifies many of the problems I've got with this. That I represent Lanark Community Development Trust, and we represented a single community, and we were encouraged by your colleagues in economic development to come forward with a community-based submission, largely for placemaking approaches rather than for any other sort of social programs. But it demonstrated, first of all the things that you're saying shouldn't happen. First of all, we put a huge amount of effort in. We spent about £20,000 in consultants' fees and incalculable amount of voluntary time in putting forward an £800,000 programme, none of which was successful. And in the first place, the council was the gateway for that. And yet we were trying to get to a UK programme, and we involved the MP and all the rest of it. It didn't do us any good at all. And we wasted a huge amount of resource, and yet we were encouraged to do that. So although your point about not being competitive is a fair one in principle, God knows how you're going to achieve that, because each individual sector or community is going to do its best to get its own case put forward. So you're going to be a magician if you're going to achieve this. And the thing that really bothers me is because, I can go back to the 80s, And it took the European Commission 5 years to develop the regional integrated programme approach. Suddenly we're trying to put something in place which is the equivalent but very different instantly, and in fact almost retrospectively and within the first financial year. So what you're suggesting is idealistic. I hope you can achieve something, but you're not going to. This is not going to be perfect, and this is going to be very, very messy. And you're not going to stop individual sectors or communities wanting to push their case hard. The other thing is that I made the point that I represent an organisation that's primarily working through DTAS and not through VASLAN and that sort and SCBO. But to me, in my experience, it's bringing together the placemaking agenda and the social agenda, which is sadly lacking. It's the thing that's been wrong with community planning ever since that was first conceived. I'd like to know if we can achieve something for the voluntary sector in South Lanarkshire, because I think that's the first challenge. It's not actually just agreeing on how to prioritise holistic social programmes in the area. It's about how to deal with place-orientated, community-orientated interests of a range of issues, many of which actually probably touch on almost all of the aims and objectives of this programme. So I think you need to spend a bit of time designing the delivery here, not just trying to promote bids for delivery. That's a very sceptical, but nevertheless, I think a very practical point of view that you've got a job in your hands.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. It's a massive ask from us and a massive ask from yourselves as well to pull together something within, a matter of months. And like you said, the last programme from the EU did, like you said, I wasn't aware, but, took 5 years, and we've been asked to do this in about 5 months. So absolutely recognise the challenges in that, and about the question around competitiveness. I don't know. So would you prefer that there was a competitive element in it or not? I don't know. We are just at this stage, and it's still very much in consultative stage at all levels. We've not made any decisions as to how we are going to deliver this, what's going to be included in our community plan, anything like that. We are trying to speak to as many people as possible and get as broad an input as we can on this, so that whatever we put to the Glasgow City region and then to the UK government is as representative as possible. And I know that there's going to be gaps, and I know it's going to be messy, like you said, and there's going to be challenges, and we're not going to please everybody, but we are trying, I suppose, we're trying to do as best we can in preparing something that people are happy with, and they do feel represents as good an approach for South Lanarkshire as we can manage, and to have your input on that obviously is invaluable. So I hope that there is something comes back from the third sector, in whatever shape that takes. We'll absolutely listen, but obviously you're the experts in how you work and what you deliver, and we can only take our lead from yourselves on that front. So yeah, I don't know if that doesn't really answer anything, but
no, it's okay. I don't think there are any answers. That's not this problem, and I'm wondering whether actually the approach we should be taking is one that it's actually the mechanism we should be concentrating on what's left of this first year, and that you should be looking for an easy and expedient way of spending the resource rather than highly participative. I'm saying that against my own interests. I'm saying that against the interests of other people. But if you raise expectations, as happened with the CRF, I think there's going to be an awful lot of cynicism around and an awful lot of wasted effort. And if we could concentrate on making a truly collaborative approach to year two, it probably is, and you put your effort into a mechanism that works, then I think that might be of benefit to everybody, because I didn't make that point lightly. I had to make an application for the old ERDF fund before there was an integrated regional programme. That was straight to Brussels. You had absolutely no idea and that had to go through Scottish office, London, and then Brussels. You'd no idea what was happening to it.
Yeah.
And you're kind of going back to that stage. It took a while to generate, for EC to generate the idea of an integrated program, to create a post like the head of city region that you've now got, and then to work out how the partnership worked and how the bidding processes worked. That took years. And you're trying to do it almost instantly. I think it's a huge demand on you. I think it's, I mean, let's be honest, the UK government's performance in this has been woeful, to leave everything to the last minute, and indeed late on almost every programme that they've come up with is quite shameful. And then, of course, we're left with the devolution factor in this as well. So, you know, we're up against it, and people can't turn around and sort of say, well, it's up to you guys, because that's impossible.
Yeah, so that has been floated as well around kind of what you've mentioned about perhaps focusing more on year 2 and 3. So if you felt that as the third sector that perhaps the turnaround was too quick, the ask was too much for 22-23, but you had input that you wanted to put forward for the next 2 financial years, then you know, absolutely, if that's what you think is right for you, then that we would encourage you to put that forward, because within the local authority, we are looking at some of those kind of quick win type things. Kind of worst case scenario, if we were going to miss out on this money, what could we invest in quickly to make sure that there wasn't any, we weren't sending any money back to the UK government. So if you thought that the next 2 financial years were more achievable in terms of pulling together like some kind of plan, then we would welcome that as well.
Yeah, Adam. Tony Scalligan, I'm picking up on Graham's point there. I see where he's going in terms of that, because it is short-term money for March, in terms of it has got to be spent by March. I know you have conversations, and one of the reasons we didn't get involved in CRF as an organisation was because it was meant to be only 6-month money at the time of when it was announced, and that was just too short-termism for us. But also, we are committed to spending our current European money. We've got NTSF money across the country, and we're actually spending that. We've spent 98% of our money, whereas a lot of other partners have spent less than 40%. And the focus is then now on new money, CRF and UK shared prosperity, and all the time we're decommitting money back to Brussels, which we've lost, if you like. So therefore, you know, my focus has been try, you know, replace the European money, which will be ending in 2023, not add to whatever they got, because it makes it a bit complicated. So I think if you look at also the numbers, £1.2 million not a lot of money this year. I think it goes up to about 2.4, and then it goes up significantly in 24-25 to 6 million. And South Lancashire's come out very well in its allocation. Other local authorities have got less proportionally than this, and I think that's what we should be focusing on, because I think when you look at least 20% capital, but it could be up to 40%. Some of the in-house delivery that you mentioned as well, and some core costs that obviously organisers might need, there might not be an awful lot left anyway in year 1 and year 2. The real money is in year 3, when there's a substantial ramp up to the level of what was a European investment, because compared to what the European programme was bringing, and in terms of allocation, the old European programme dwarfs these UK share prosperity numbers considerably, if you like. So there isn't going to be enough to go around, and it's not replacement money. And I think they do need a plan for when there is substantial resources available, which is probably year 3. But I think there's less in year 1 and year 2 than people really think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, the money doesn't even equal what we were getting from the EU until the 3rd year. So, and obviously there's people like yourselves and South Lanarkshire Council also have commitments from EU funding. They were doing, like, you know, the rural development type stuff, that was all EU funded. So there are, you know, we're looking at what if impact that would have if we stopped funding what was EU funded, and if there's any way that we could use the Shared Prosperity Fund to deliver some of that work as well. So that's, yeah, it's all still ongoing, and like you said, and you know, if that's what as a sector you thought was important, and you know, focusing on that 3rd year perhaps, that could still be included in the plan. You don't need to have a presence over all 3 years. Certainly you could say that your preference would be to look at, you know, 2nd year maybe and 3rd year being involved, so that gave you time to develop whatever kind of sector-wide approach it was that you thought would work best.
Yeah, it also means that I'm not, as an organisation, I'm not running by delivering my last 6 months of European money and trying to get this off the ground at the exact same time. And
Yeah.
also, you'll be aware of the No One Left Behind strategy and how that's all going as well in terms of YPG and No One Behind. It just becomes very, very difficult to manage resources to deliver all of that together. Whereas if we did a phased approach where I think you're right, and maybe do some sort of a smaller work, pilot work, kind of a development work within year 2, and for full plans in year 3, that might be a sensible option, because that's when the resources is probably available in time to meet those needs. Because if not, we will end up, I think, developing plans that are higher than what you can meet in terms of that, in terms of the expectations. And I think it's getting that balance right.
Point.
Yeah, it was just again just something that's came into the chat. Ashley talking about the potential of having sort of an expression of interest, and then doing sort of an assessment in terms of whether it would be more a standalone application or whether there's opportunity for collaborative bids. But I know that time's getting to us, so we've got Nancy and then Rebecca with their hands up.
Thank you. I think since we're kind of a wee bit behind, I think if you look at how the Community Planning Partnership are looking to do their locality groups going forward, and Vaslin Third Sector Forum locality groups, this to me would have been a mechanism to actually bring something out of this that was useful. But at the end of the day, there's huge challenges. The time's really short, and what we have to do is try and make sure that South Lanarkshire gets as much of this money as it can possibly get, so that we can make a difference on the ground. So it's how we best do that together. And I'm sure individual bids probably it wouldn't be probably as useful as actually sitting around the table and actually coming up with something that's across the board that fits in with what the investment is. What are the key areas of need across the Shire, and where can that be, right down to the smallest area on the ground? So there's a whole load of challenges. But for me, we have to be prepared to actually look at how we bring the best and the most amount of money to make the biggest difference to our local communities.
Okay, Rebecca.
Yeah, so I was, I agree with everyone's points that have been made, and I think if we were going to go for a year 2, 3 or a phased approach, I think it would be good to ensure that in year 1 there's capacity funding, so the third sector is enabled to, is resourced to come together, because it is quite a comprehensive approach to take, to take a collaborative approach, and particularly to make sure it's as fair and equitable and as wide and as meaningful as possible. But that can't be done without any resource. So maybe the year 1 resource is a capacity pot to enable us, to free us, to give us some time to come together to do that work, which then actually moves into money for delivery. And I also agree with the pilot approach too. There could be some pilots within that approach, I suppose, phasing in towards the end of year 1.
Yeah, I don't. There's nothing that I can think of that would prevent that. I think if that was what you felt was the most appropriate approach, we would certainly love to hear that. Just, I know we've only got 2 minutes left, but if we can just spend like 2 minutes. So we obviously had a lot of really useful feedback today, but I think if you were able to perhaps not necessarily convene, but look at a way of feeding that back to us, so that we can have a third sector's and kind of input on that, that would be really useful. If there was a way for, so I know it's a lot of information and people might not have their thoughts and opinions right now, but perhaps go away tomorrow and you think, well, I actually should have asked that, and you can always drop us an email, no problem. But kind of, I don't know what the best forum for yourselves to kind of convene and generate that feedback that you want to give us in terms of what you want put included in the investment plan to represent the third sector's interests for the shared prosperity. I don't want to be prescriptive, so I absolutely would leave that up to yourselves to feed that back whatever way you felt was best.
Yeah, I think taking your point on, Adam, it's a lot of information to take on in a very short space of time at the moment. So what we'll put, or what I would suggest is if the ones that are around the screen today take the information, try to digest it maybe over the next couple of days, and then if we could try to get some space in the diary. I know that everybody's priorities are maybe sort of elsewhere at the moment, but if we can try to get some time together where we can get that sort of conversation at least started and get some sort of feedback to you, that we can feed that in, we would be quite willing to sort of facilitate that, whether it's a face-to-face or a hybrid sort of model. We'll put out a few dates and sort of see how we can go forward with that in terms of the uptake. I'm conscious that there may be people who want to have an input in this that couldn't have made it along this morning, so we would put it out to the wider sector again. But obviously we've got the information that you've provided this morning to digest, and that will give us sort of a starter for 10. So yeah. I think if everybody's sort of happy with that, what I'll do after this meeting is we've taken a recording of the meeting, and if you can provide the overheads, that would be great. Then we can put that out to everybody. Maybe take till the weekend to have a wee think over it and a wee look through it, have a list of questions going, and then maybe next week or the following week, if we could try to get a meeting together with third sector representation, and then we can sort of feed that back and then hopefully into the plan.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'll send over all of the slides and all of the additional information that the UK government has, and one of the documents in particular lists all of the 41 or 51 including multiplier interventions that I mentioned, and that kind of would probably be a really good starting place to kind of understand the kind of interventions that the UK government want to see. What of those interventions do you think works for South Lanarkshire in the third sector, and maybe pick out a few of them that you think is a priority for yourselves as a starting point anyway, to sort of generate discussion and what you want to put forward to us. But I'll provide all that information to yourself, Peter, and you can distribute.
Yeah, not a problem. I think we're 2 minutes over, but is there any other last points that anybody wants to add, or any questions we have?
And feel free to send my email out as well. And if anybody does have a wee question that they just want me to answer, I'm more than happy to do that if I can. I'm not promising anything.
Yeah, and Tony, I'll make sure that it's sent to you as well as your colleague. I'll just send it out to everybody that's registered, but thanks for just letting us know. I'll make sure that you're added onto the list.